Hey everyone, my name's Jacob, I'm 32 years old, and today I'm going to tell you a story that changed my life forever. It's a story of betrayal, ambition, and how I turned the tables on two people who thought they could use me. But before we dive into all of that, let me set the stage. I had always been the reliable guy at work. You know the type, the one who puts in the extra hours, the one who makes sure everything's done right, the one who people trust to get things done. It wasn't glamorous, but I took pride in my work. I didn't need praise or recognition. I just wanted to know I was making a difference. And in the beginning, things were going well. I was working in a mid-level position at a marketing firm, and my career seemed to be on the right track. That was until she walked into my life. Her name was Sarah. She was new to the company, hired to fill a role that I thought was mine for the taking. But there was something about her that caught the eye of our boss, Greg. He was one of those older, charismatic types who could charm his way through any situation. He was a master of reading people, knowing exactly how to make them feel important, or, in Sarah's case, desired. At first, it wasn't obvious. Sarah was bright, talented, and eager to prove herself. She started out in a junior position, just like I had when I first joined the firm. I didn't think much of it. But then I began noticing little things. Greg would take her out for coffee breaks more often than anyone else. He'd pull her aside for long conversations, the kind of talks that didn't seem to have much to do with work. I didn't think much of it at first either. Maybe they were just collaborating, I told myself. I had my own responsibilities to focus on. But over time, the whispers started. It wasn't long before people started saying that Sarah was getting closer to Greg. I didn't want to believe it. She was talented, and he was just being a good mentor, right? But the rumors didn't stop. People began to speculate, and honestly, I tried to ignore it. It wasn't my business. But there was something in the back of my mind telling me that something wasn't right. It all came to a head during one of the quarterly performance reviews. I had worked hard, put in the hours, and was ready to step up in the company. I had been hoping for a promotion. Greg had promised me that if I kept pushing, kept showing that I was ready, I'd get my shot. And yet, when the meeting came around, he barely acknowledged my progress. Instead, his attention was all on Sarah. I'll never forget how he looked at her when he told the room that she was getting a major promotion, effective immediately. My heart sank. I was happy for her in a way, but something about it felt off. I had worked harder, longer. I had earned the respect of my colleagues. Why wasn't I getting the recognition I deserved? Why was she being handed this promotion so easily? That's when I started to put the pieces together. There had been rumors about Greg's relationships with younger women at the office, but no one ever talked about it openly. Now it was becoming clear to me. Sarah had played the game better than I had. She'd used her charm, her looks, and whatever else she could to get ahead. It wasn't just about her abilities. It was about what she was willing to do to climb that ladder. And when I thought about it, I couldn't help but feel disgusted. She had slept with him to get promoted. She had used me and everyone else to climb over us. She had used her body to get the promotion I was supposed to have. I couldn't let it go. I wasn't just angry at her. I was furious at myself. How had I not seen it? How had I let it all unfold without doing anything about it? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't have to play by their rules anymore. I could do things my way. I had a plan, and it was time to set it in motion. I spent the next few weeks keeping to myself. I didn't let anyone see the rage boiling inside me, but trust me, it was there, simmering just beneath the surface. I'd walk into the office, nod to people, and pretend everything was fine. But in my head, all I could think about was Sarah and Greg. How could they both be so arrogant? How could they think they could get away with this? What I didn't realize at the time was that I was already starting to change. No longer was I the guy who quietly worked hard, hoping my time would come. Now, I was the guy who had been wronged, and I wasn't about to let it slide. I wasn't going to sit back and watch these two destroy everything I'd worked for. I started watching Greg and Sarah more closely. I watched their interactions, every coffee break, every meeting, every time they were alone in the office. I took mental notes. I wasn't just trying to figure out what they were doing. I was trying to understand how they were doing it. How had Sarah managed to manipulate Greg so easily? How had she used him to get ahead? And that's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just Sarah's ambition or charm. It was the way Greg had been acting. He was in love with the power he held over her, and over me. He enjoyed having control. He enjoyed being the one pulling the strings, deciding who rose and who fell. He had used his position as a weapon, and now he was toying with the lives of the people around him. But I wasn't about to let him keep his power. I knew what I had to do. The first step was to make sure I had leverage. I needed to find a way to expose what had really been going on between Greg and Sarah. I knew their affair was secret, but that didn't mean it was going to stay that way forever. Greg had a reputation for being a professional, but I could see the cracks in his armor. He wasn't as untouchable as he thought. One afternoon, I got lucky. I overheard a conversation between Sarah and one of her friends in the break room. They were talking about Greg, about how he had promised her even more promotions, how he was grooming her to be his right hand. I didn't hear everything, but I heard enough. That was the confirmation I needed. This wasn't just about her getting ahead. She had crossed a line, and Greg had let her. Now I had the evidence I needed, but I wasn't about to make my move just yet. No, I needed to play this carefully. I needed to make sure I had all my ducks in a row. I needed to watch and wait for the perfect moment, the moment when I could strike. I kept a low profile for a few more days. I played the quiet, hard-working guy that I always had been, but inside, I was calculating every move. Every time Greg sent an email to Sarah or they met behind closed doors, I knew. Every time Sarah acted overly confident at meetings, I saw through it. She wasn't just a talented employee, she was a puppet, and Greg was the one pulling the strings. But things were starting to change. Sarah was getting bolder, and Greg was starting to treat her differently. He was making decisions that seemed to favor her more and more, pushing me to the side. I wasn't going to let this happen. I wasn't going to be the guy who let his career slip away because of their dirty little game. I knew it was time to put my plan into action, but what I needed was something that would destroy them both, something that would expose everything. I didn't just want to get revenge on Sarah for what she had done. No, I wanted to make sure that Greg felt the weight of his actions too. I wanted him to know what it felt like to lose control. So, I started gathering information. I hacked into Greg's computer late one night, using a program I'd developed myself. I found emails, messages, and files that proved their affair, their manipulation, everything. I even found some documents that showed how Greg had used his position to benefit his personal life, making promises to employees in exchange for favors. He had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored, and now I had the power to bring it all crashing down. But it wasn't just about exposing them. It was about making sure they would never be able to harm anyone again. I needed to make sure they paid for what they had done, not just to me, but to everyone they had manipulated, lied to, and taken advantage of. And I was going to make sure they would regret it for the rest of their lives. I spent the next few days on edge, every minute consumed by the thought of what I was about to do. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about power. Power that I had lost and was now determined to take back. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that exposing their affair was only part of the equation. I wanted to take Greg down, but I also wanted to make sure that Sarah never used anyone the way she had used me again. I wasn't going to just ruin their careers. I was going to ruin their reputations, make sure they both knew what it felt like to be vulnerable, to be powerless. I remember the night before I made my move. I sat in front of my computer, staring at the files I had gathered. There were emails between Sarah and Greg, messages they thought were private, confidential, messages where they discussed their plans to climb the corporate ladder at my expense. I even had the proof of Greg's shady dealings, how he had manipulated people to get what he wanted. It was all there, every piece of evidence I needed to bring them both to their knees. But I wasn't going to stop there. I had a plan to make sure my revenge was as sweet as it was thorough. The first part was simple. I leaked everything. Every email, every conversation, every document that tied them together went straight to HR. I made sure it was impossible for anyone to ignore. Greg couldn't deny it, and Sarah wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. They were both exposed. I remember sitting back and watching it unfold. The next day, HR called an emergency meeting. They had all the evidence. Greg and Sarah were both pulled into the meeting, their faces pale as they realized what had just happened. The whispers around the office started almost immediately. People who had respected Greg suddenly started questioning everything about him. Sarah, the ambitious employee who had once seemed untouchable, was now just another victim of her own manipulation. But I didn't stop there. I had one more card to play, and this was the one that would destroy them both. I sent an anonymous tip to the media. I made sure the story got out, making sure the affair and Greg's corruption were front-page news. The story spread like wildfire. Greg's name was dragged through the mud. Sarah, once seen as an up-and-coming star, became a symbol of manipulation and deceit. But what really shocked them was how the media painted the picture. They made it clear that Sarah's rise to power had been because of her relationship with Greg, that she had slept with him to get ahead. The whole thing turned into a scandal. They were both labeled as unethical, selfish, and manipulative, and their careers were effectively destroyed. No one would ever trust them again. It was over. For me, though, it wasn't just about seeing them suffer. It was about regaining my own sense of control. I knew the power of knowledge and leverage. The same tools they had used against me, I had used against them. And watching it all unfold, watching them try to explain themselves, knowing there was nothing they could say to save their careers, was the sweet taste of victory I had been craving. But I didn't stop there, not by a long shot. As I watched their downfall, I felt something inside me change. I wasn't the quiet guy who kept his head down anymore. I wasn't the man who had been betrayed and let it slide. I had become something more, someone who had taken control of his own fate. I had destroyed the people who tried to ruin me, and in doing so, I had built something new for myself. The final blow came when the company's board decided to part ways with Greg and Sarah. They didn't even get a chance to explain themselves in a proper setting. They were ousted so quickly, it was as if they had never existed in the first place. I didn't feel sorry for them, not even for a second. They had done this to themselves, and they had paid the price. As for me, I had my moment of triumph. I didn't have to destroy my own career in the process, didn't have to resort to unethical tactics to get ahead. I had done it with my own two hands, with my own skills, my own knowledge, and a little bit of patience. That was the best part. They had underestimated me, thought I was just another face in the crowd. But now, I had made sure they knew exactly who I was. And so, I walked away from all of it. From the office, from the drama, from Sarah and Greg. I wasn't the same person who had walked in a few months ago, and I certainly wasn't the person I had been when they thought they could use me for their own gain. I had become someone who knew his worth, and wouldn't let anyone take it away from him. I didn't need revenge to feel victorious. All I needed was to know that I had taken control. That was all the power I would ever need. The weeks that followed were a blur. The office, once a place of frustration and resentment, now felt completely different. The dynamics had shifted, and everyone knew it. As word spread about what had happened to Greg and Sarah, there was an odd sense of quiet in the halls. People were careful around me, some unsure of whether I had been involved in the leaks. Others looked at me with a certain level of respect, knowing I had played a part in bringing down two of the most powerful figures in the company. I didn't care. I had what I needed. the satisfaction of seeing them fall, and the knowledge that I had done it on my own terms. But more than that, I had a sense of liberation. The chains that had bound me to that office, to that life, were gone. I was free, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly in control of my own destiny. The company didn't know what to do with me at first. They couldn't exactly fire me, not after what had just happened, but they also didn't know if they could trust me. It wasn't long before I found myself being offered a new role, one that was more aligned with my skills and aspirations. It was a promotion, yes, but it was also a new beginning. I had earned it. Not because I had played the corporate game, but because I had played it smarter than anyone else. What really struck me, though, was how people started looking at me differently. The respect that had always been out of reach was now mine for the taking. I started receiving invitations to high-level meetings. My ideas were being heard, and I wasn't just the guy who did the work anymore. I was the guy who knew how to get things done, the guy who could cut through the nonsense and deliver results. I was respected in a way that I hadn't been before, and it felt good. But as I moved into my new role, I started to realize something. I wasn't the same person I had been when all this started. The anger, the hurt, the need for revenge, it had all faded. It had taken a lot of energy to bring Greg and Sarah down, and while I'd enjoyed the sweet taste of victory, I knew that I had to let go of it to truly move forward. I couldn't allow myself to be defined by that moment forever. The real victory, I realized, wasn't in destroying them. It was in what I had built for myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I was using my skills, my intelligence, my ability to adapt and move forward. I had proven that I could rise above it all, that I didn't need to rely on anyone but myself. I think that's when I truly understood what had happened. What had started out as a quest for revenge had turned into a path toward personal growth and self-discovery. I had become someone who was capable of much more than I had ever believed. And then, of course, there was Sarah. I ran into her a few weeks after everything had gone down. It was completely unplanned, just a coincidence that we happened to be at the same event. She looked different, quieter, more reserved. She had lost the confident, almost arrogant demeanor she had once had. There was no longer that gleam in her eye, the sense of entitlement that used to define her. She had been humbled, and I could see the regret in her eyes. When our eyes met, there was a brief moment of awkwardness. She hesitated, as if unsure of whether to approach me. I didn't say anything, and she didn't either. We just stood there for a moment, staring at each other, and then she walked away. I didn't chase after her. There was no need. I had already won, and seeing her like that, defeated, regretful, unsure of herself, was enough. The person who had once used me was now just another casualty of her own actions, and I wasn't going to waste any more time thinking about her or what had happened. It was over. It had been over for a long time. As time went on, I kept my head down and worked hard. My career was steadily improving, and I was gaining more influence at the company, but I didn't need to chase after validation anymore. I had already proven to myself that I was capable of achieving everything I wanted, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. One of the most profound changes in me, however, was the way I began to view relationships. Before all of this, I had been naive, trusting in the people around me. I had given my heart to Sarah, thought that loyalty and trust meant something, but now I saw things differently. I had learned that people would use you if you let them, and that sometimes even the people you trusted the most were the ones who could betray you without a second thought. But I also learned that I didn't need to depend on anyone else to define my worth. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes again, but I wasn't going to let the bitterness of my past control my future. Instead, I focused on building myself into someone who would never be taken advantage of again. I invested in my own growth, learning new skills, expanding my knowledge, and challenging myself every day to become a better person. My career continued to flourish, But now I was doing it for myself. There was no more need for revenge, no more need for validation from others. I had found a sense of peace that I hadn't even known I was searching for. I looked back at everything that had happened, at Sarah, at Greg, at all the pain and betrayal, and I realized that I had come out stronger. I hadn't just survived the betrayal, I had thrived, and I would never let anyone take that away from me again. So, I moved forward, leaving the past behind me, knowing that the best was yet to come, and that, my friends, is how I destroyed them both. But in the end, I built myself up stronger than I could have ever imagined.